Her name was Clara Whitfield, and she had not laughed in 3 years. She had not danced. She had not looked anyone directly in the eyes for longer than a second. She moved through her days like a ghost who had forgotten how to haunt anything. She woke up, made coffee, sat by the window, and stared at the pine trees until the sky turned dark again. Then she went to bed and stared at the ceiling until her body gave out and forced her into a restless, dreamless sleep. This was her life. This was everything her life had become. It had not always been this way. Clara had once been the kind of woman who walked into rooms and made them feel warmer. She had a smile that disarmed strangers and a laugh that started somewhere deep in her chest and rolled outward like a wave. She had been a teacher, a good one, the kind her students remembered. She had been someone her friends called first when they had news, good or bad. She had been loved, and she had known how to love back. But 3 years ago, in a single season of terrible events, everything collapsed. First, her daughter Maya died. A car accident on a rainy Tuesday evening. Maya was 19. She had been driving home from a late shift at the diner where she worked to save money for nursing school. The other driver had run a red light. Maya had not seen it coming. She had not had time to be afraid. That was what the paramedic told Clara at the hospital, as if it was supposed to help. It did not help. Then, for months later, her husband Daniel left. He did not leave because he was cruel. He left because he was drowning too, and he could not hold Clara up and keep his own head above water at the same time. He said so, in almost those exact words, on a quiet Sunday morning with 2 packed bags near the front door. Clara had not argued. She had just nodded and watched him go, standing at the window with a cup of cold coffee in her hands. After Daniel, the job ended. She had gone back to teaching too soon. She knew that now. She had stood in front of 32 7th graders one afternoon and simply stopped speaking mid-sentence. She stared at the whiteboard. A student had asked if she was okay. She had started crying and could not stop. The principal had been kind about it. He had called it a leave of absence. But Clara knew she was not coming back. So she had retreated to this cabin, a place her father had left her, deep in the Black Hills of South Dakota. She had told herself she was going there to heal. But healing requires movement, and Clara had gone completely still. 3 years of stillness. 3 years of silence. 3 years of watching those pine trees and wondering if the part of her that had once loved being alive was ever going to come back. She had started to believe it was not. She had started to believe that Clara, the real one, the warm one, the one who laughed, had died in that hospital waiting room the same night Maya did. What lived in the cabin now was just the leftover. The shell. The part that still breathed out of habit. It was on a cold morning in late October, when the frost was coming in low across the hills and the sky was a pale, bruised gray, that she first saw him. She had gone out to collect firewood from the pile along the east side of the cabin. She was wearing her father's old flannel jacket, the sleeves too long, her hair unwashed and pulled back in a knot. She was not expecting anyone. Nobody came out here. Nobody knew she was here, or if they did, they had learned not to visit. He was standing at the edge of the tree line about 40 feet away. So, watching. He was a tall man with a broad, straight posture, wearing a dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat with a single feather tucked into the band. His face was weathered and calm, the face of someone who had seen many things and had made his peace with most of them. He was not young. But he was not old in a frail way. He was old in the way that certain mountains are old, solid, knowing, unhurried. Clara froze. Her arms full of wood. Her heart beating suddenly, sharply, in a way it had not in a long time. She did not know who he was. But something deep in her chest, something she thought had gone quiet forever, stirred. He did not move toward her. He did not wave or call out. He simply looked at her across the frost-white grass with eyes that were dark and patient and full of something she could not quite name. Then he turned and walked back into the trees. Clara stood there for a long time after he was gone, the firewood slowly growing heavy in her arms, the cold wrapping itself around her shoulders, and something she could not explain, moving slowly, quietly back to life somewhere deep inside her chest. She asked about him at the small general store in town, 8 miles down the dirt road from her cabin. The woman behind the counter, a stout and cheerful Lakota woman named B, knew immediately who Clara was describing. She did not even need to hear the full description. "That's Chief Raymond Eagleheart," B said, sliding a bag of flour across the counter. "He walks those hills every morning. Has for as long as anyone around here can remember." "Is he actually a chief?" Clara asked. B smiled, the kind of smile that held a whole story behind it. "He was. Traditional leader of his band. Still is to many people. But he gave up the formal title years ago. Said titles got in the way of listening." She paused. He's the one people around here go to when they've lost something. Not things. The other kind of lost. Clara bought her flower and left without asking anything more. But she thought about Raymond Eagleheart for the rest of the day. She thought about the way he had stood at the tree line. Still and calm and looking at her as if he had been expecting to find her there. As if he had known somehow that she needed to be seen. He came back the next morning. And the morning after that. Always at the same time, just after the sun came fully over the ridge, and always to the same spot at the edge of the tree line. He never crossed onto her property. He never spoke. He simply stood there for a few minutes watching the cabin, and then turned and walked back into the trees. Clara began to expect him. Then she began to want him there. That feeling startled her. Wanting something was an act she had almost forgotten. She had stopped wanting anything after Maya. Wanting meant caring. Caring meant the possibility of loss. And she had decided, somewhere in the fog of those first terrible months, that she was done risking loss. But she wanted to see the old man standing at the tree line. She could not help it. On the 5th morning she stepped out of the cabin before he arrived and waited. She stood on the porch with her coffee watching the tree line. When he appeared she lifted a hand. Just a small raise of her fingers. A half wave. The smallest possible gesture of acknowledgement. He stopped walking. He looked at her. Then he lifted his hand the same way, quiet, unhurried, and held it there for a moment before lowering it and continuing to his spot. That evening there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find Raymond Eagleheart standing on her porch, holding a covered tin pot that smelled of wood smoke and something warm with herbs. Up close, his presence was even more striking. He was perhaps 70, with deep lines carved into his face by weather and years, and eyes that were black and clear and direct. He wore his gray hair long, tied back simply. He looked at her without apology, without discomfort, and with a kind of attention that made Clara feel, for the first time in 3 years, as though she was actually visible. "I made too much soup," he said simply. She stood there for a moment. Then she stepped back and opened the door wider. They sat at her kitchen table, the old pine one her father had built, and ate in the kind of silence that was not uncomfortable. Raymond ate slowly and with great attention, as if the act of eating deserved respect. Clara watched him more than she ate. She noticed the steadiness of his hands, the way he held the spoon, the way he seemed to fill the room not with noise but with a kind of presence that pushed the emptiness back. After a while he said, "You have been alone here for some time." 3 years, she said. She did not know why she answered so directly. She had not told anyone that. Not the exact number. He nodded. He did not say he was sorry. He did not tell her that things would get better. He just nodded as if 3 years of alone was a real thing, a heavy thing, and it deserved to be acknowledged without being immediately fixed. "The land here remembers things," he said after a moment. "The hills have been holding grief since long before either of us was born." He looked out the small kitchen window toward the trees. "Sometimes it helps to know your grief has company." Clara did not cry. She had cried so much in the early years that she sometimes thought she had run out. But her throat tightened in a way it had not in a long time, and she looked down at her bowl so he would not see her face. He did not press. He did not ask what had happened to her. He simply finished his soup and said he would bring the pot back on Thursday. She did not stop him from making that plan. After he left, Clara stood at the window and watched the dark shape of the trees for a long time. Something had shifted. Very slightly. Like the first crack of ice in a river in early spring. Not a break, not yet, but a sound. A signal. A beginning. She washed the bowls and went to bed. And for the first time in 3 years she slept through the entire night. Thursday became a rhythm. Then Friday. Then most days. Raymond Eagleheart showed up, sometimes with food, sometimes without, sometimes in the late morning and sometimes near dusk, and they sat together in a way that asked nothing of Clara except that she be present. He did not try to fix her. He did not offer advice wrapped in stories designed to teach her something. He was simply there, and his being there made the cabin feel less like a place where someone was hiding and more like a place where someone actually lived. He told her things about the land. The names the Lakota gave to different ridgelines. The way the wind moved through the pines before snow came. He pointed out places where, long ago, ceremonies had been held, not with drama or solemnity but matter-of-factly, the way one might mention that a favorite bakery used to be on a certain corner. The hills had history that went back thousands of years, and he carried that history in him like most people carry their childhoods, quietly, naturally, as part of everything he did and said. One morning he arrived with a small bundle wrapped in soft leather. He set it on the porch railing without ceremony and sat in one of the 2 wooden chairs Clara had dragged out the week before. She looked at the bundle but did not touch it. "What is that?" she asked. "Open it," he said. Inside were small things. A smooth river stone, pale gray and speckled. A dried sprig of sage that released its sharp, clean smell when she touched it. A small piece of birchwood carved into the rough shape of a bird in flight, not refined, not polished, just the honest first shape of a thing. And a folded piece of paper. She unfolded the paper. It was blank. She looked up at him. "There's nothing written on it." "Not yet," he said. She waited for him to explain. He let the silence sit for a while, the way he always did, giving his words room before he sent them out. "My people have always understood that grief is not a problem," he said at last. "It is not a sickness to be cured. It is a process of carrying. The body must find a way to carry what the heart cannot put down." He looked at the blank paper in her hands. "There are things you are holding that have no name yet. Things you have never said out loud to anyone, maybe not even to yourself. The paper is for when you find the words." Clara folded the paper and held it carefully. She thought about all the things she had never said. The guilt she felt, the specific, crushing guilt of having argued with Maya on the phone the morning before the accident, a stupid argument about something she could no longer remember. The guilt of having let Daniel leave without a fight, as if she had given up on him the way she had given up on herself. The guilt of sitting in this cabin for 3 years, breathing and eating and sleeping, while the people who had loved her went on with the hard work of living without her. She had never said any of this to anyone. Not to the grief counselor she had seen twice and then stopped calling back. Not to her sister in Phoenix who left monthly voicemails that Clara never answered. Not to the silent dark of the bedroom ceiling, not even in her own head, where she had learned to move around the worst thoughts the way you move around broken glass on a floor. She said none of it now either. But something about the blank paper made her feel like it could be said. Eventually. When she was ready. Over the following weeks, Raymond began to show her small acts that he called, simply, ceremony. He did not present them with formality or as a lesson. He did it the way you show a friend how to make a good cup of tea, casually, with care, without making them feel as if they are being taught. He showed her how to burn sage and let the smoke move through the rooms of the cabin. He took her to a place in the hills where a small spring came up through the rocks, and he knelt and put his hands in the cold water and stayed like that for a long time, very quiet. She knelt beside him. The cold was so sharp it hurt, and she left her hands in anyway, and when she pulled them out her skin was red and alive and tingling, and she felt, for one strange and vivid second, entirely present in her own body. He taught her to walk the way he walked, slowly, with attention, as if the ground deserved notice. Most people walk to get somewhere. Raymond walked as though the walking itself was the destination. He would stop to examine a piece of bark or a track in the mud or the way the light came through a break in the trees, and he would look at these things with the full attention of someone who understood that nothing was small if you looked at it properly. Clara began to look at things properly. She began to notice. And noticing, she would come to understand, was the first step back. Not healing, not yet, but the beginning of the long walk toward it. The blank paper sat on her kitchen windowsill. She looked at it every morning. She was not ready to write on it yet. But she had not thrown it away. That, Raymond would have said, was enough for now. It was a night in November when the first snow came early, dropping fast and thick from a sky that had gone white by noon. Clara and Raymond were sitting by the fire in the cabin when the storm arrived in full. The fire cracked and shifted. The wind pressed against the windows. It was the kind of night that turned a room inward, that drew the walls in close and made the light feel precious. Raymond had been telling her about his late wife, Ada, who had died 11 years before. He spoke of her the way he spoke of everything, without rush, without drama, but with a warmth that was unmistakable, that moved through every word like heat through stone. Ada had loved to cook. Ada had sung to herself while she worked. Ada had laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them, which he had found both annoying and deeply endearing. "You still miss her," Clara said. It was not a question. "Every day," he said simply. "Missing her is part of my life now. It is not separate from the good things. It lives alongside them." Clara stared at the fire for a long time. The snow hammered the windows softly. The fire hissed. "I argued with my daughter the morning she died," she said. The words came out quietly, almost without decision, as if they had been waiting very close to the surface and had simply found a moment to rise. Raymond did not react. He did not turn toward her sharply or make a sound. He just listened the way he always listened, fully and without moving. "I don't even remember what it was about," Clara continued. Her voice was steady but only barely. "Something small. Something stupid. She was running late for a shift and I said something critical. About money, I think, or about her being careful with the car. And she said, "Mom, stop," and hung up. And that was the last time I heard her voice. She stopped. That was the last thing I ever said to my daughter. The fire popped. Outside, the snow kept falling. "I've never said that to anyone," she said. "Not once. Not to Daniel, not to my sister, not to anyone." She looked at her hands in her lap. "Because if I say it out loud, it becomes real. And if it's real, then I have to figure out how to live with it." Raymond was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You have been living with it. You have been carrying it alone for 3 years. That is not living lightly." He paused. "What would Maya say, do you think, if she knew you had been punishing yourself this way?" Clara opened her mouth. Then she closed it. The question landed somewhere deep and sharp. She knew exactly what Maya would say. Maya would be furious. Not at Clara, at the waste of it. At 3 years of cold coffee and watching pine trees and letting the world go on spinning without her. Maya had been that kind of girl. Fierce about life. Quick to forgive but slow to accept surrender. She had gotten that from Clara, actually, from the old Clara, the one who walked into rooms and made them warm. Clara's breath caught. Then it broke open. She cried, not the quiet, leaking kind of crying she had done alone in the dark for 3 years, but the full, ugly, tearing kind that comes when something that has been held down for too long finally fights its way to the surface. She pressed her hands to her face and shook, and the sounds she made were the sounds of someone being cracked open from the inside. Raymond did not move away. He did not put his arm around her or make hushing sounds or tell her it was going to be okay. He simply sat, solid and still, beside her. Present. Witness. The way a tree is present during a storm, not fixing anything, not stopping anything, just standing. When it passed, Clara sat with her face wet and her chest hollowed out in the way crying sometimes leaves you, emptied of something heavy, raw and tender in the new space where it had been. She reached for the blank paper on the windowsill. It had been there for weeks. She picked up a pen from the table. She wrote Maya's name. Just that. One word in the center of the white page. And then she sat with it for a long time, looking at the name of her daughter written in her own hand, and she let herself feel everything she had been running from. The love, the loss, the guilt, the desperate, bottomless grief of it, all of it at once, without flinching, without looking away. It was the hardest thing she had done since standing at Maya's grave. And it was also, quietly, the bravest. Raymond looked at the paper. He nodded once, slowly, with the gravity of someone who understood exactly what it had cost her to write that one word. "Now it is real," he said softly. "And now you can begin." Outside, the snow kept falling, white and clean and covering everything, the way the world sometimes does when it is trying to offer a new beginning to those who are finally willing to receive it. Spring came to the Black Hills the way it always does, slowly at first, then all at once. 1 week there was still frost on the ground in the mornings and the pines stood stiff and gray-green against a pale sky. Then, almost overnight, the hillside broke open with green. The birches sent out their small, shaking leaves. The creek behind the cabin ran fast with snowmelt, loud and cold and full of purpose. The birds came back. Mornings filled again with sound. Clara noticed all of it. She noticed the way she had not noticed anything for 3 years. She had written on the paper again, many times over. Not just Maya's name but all of it. The argument. The guilt. The love. The memory of Maya's laugh, which had been exactly like her own. The memory of Daniel's face in the morning before everything broke. The memory of standing in front of her classroom before the grief swallowed her whole, looking at 32 seventh graders who were still, miraculously, curious about the world. She had written until she ran out of paper and had to get more. She had written things she had never said and things she had always known and things she had only understood in the writing. And then, one afternoon, she had driven to the cemetery in town and stood at Maya's grave with the papers in her hands and read all of it out loud into the cold, clear air. She cried. She laughed once at a memory that surprised her. Then she cried again. And when she left lighter. She called her sister in Phoenix. The phone rang twice before her sister picked up, and before the woman could speak, Clara said, "I'm sorry I didn't call. I'm sorry it took so long. I'm okay. I'm not all the way okay yet. But I'm working on it." There was a silence, and then the sound of her sister crying, and then both of them talking at once, filling 3 years of silence with the sound of each other's voices. She called the school in the spring and spoke with the principal, who was warm and careful and who said she could come back part-time in the fall if she felt ready. She said she would think about it. That night she thought about it and she felt, for the first time, something that was adjacent to looking forward. Not certainty. Not peace. But the possibility of both. Raymond came that morning with wild sage from the hillside and they walked together to the spring in the hills, the same one where he had shown her how to put her hands in the cold water. The trees were thick with new green. The ground was soft underfoot. Clara walked the way he had taught her, slowly, with attention, noticing the shape of light through leaves and the sound of the creek and the particular rich smell of the earth after a long winter. At the spring they knelt together. She put her hands in. The cold shocked her, the same as always, and she laughed at the shock. Raymond smiled. It was the first time she had ever seen him smile fully, and it changed his whole face, made him look, for a moment, decades younger, like the young man he must have once been on these same hills. "You laughed," he said. "I did," she said, surprised and pleased by it. "The Lakota have a word," he said. "Wikozani. It means wellness, but not just of the body. Wellness of the whole being, the mind, the heart, the spirit, the connection to the world around you." He looked at the water moving over his hands. "You cannot rush it. It comes when it comes. But there are things you can do to be ready for it when it arrives." Clara thought about everything that had led her to this moment. The 3 years of stillness. The man at the tree line. The soup. The small bundle of objects. The long evenings by the fire. The blank paper and the name she had finally written. The grave and the pages she had read aloud into the cold air. The phone call to her sister. The possibility of going back. "I wasn't ready before," she said. "No," he agreed. "But you stayed. That mattered." She had not thought of it that way. She had thought of her time in the cabin as failure, as 3 years of hiding, of giving up, of choosing not to live. But Raymond was offering her a different way to see it. She had stayed. She had not disappeared entirely. Some small, surviving part of her had kept her in that cabin, near the pine trees and the frost and the spring, in a place where healing was possible, even when she had not been ready to begin. She had been waiting, without knowing it, for something that could reach her. And something had. On her drive back to the cabin that afternoon, Clara stopped at the top of the ridge and got out of the car. She stood looking out over the hills, the sweep of dark pines, the pale thread of the creek far below, the big sky full of high white clouds moving fast from the west. The wind was cold and clean and smelled of sage and thaw. She stood there for a long time. Not staring. Not waiting. Just looking, with the eyes of someone who is glad to be standing in a particular place at a particular moment. The eyes of someone who has come back from somewhere far away and who is, at last, grateful to be here. Clara Whitfield breathed in. She breathed out. The hills were old and vast and patient, and they held her grief the way Raymond had said they would, alongside everything else as part of the whole, not separate from the beauty but woven into it. She got back in the car and drove home. The cabin looked different in the spring light. It looked like a place where someone lived. Where someone was healing. Where someone had fought very quietly and very hard to find her way back to herself. She went inside. She put the kettle on. She opened the window so she could hear the creek. And for the first time in 3 years, the sound of the water felt like company.